This video is sponsored by Squarespace. It's now been around 3 months since I got my hands on the Fuji 18mm f1.4, and after all of that time using it for both photography and for video, I'm ready to share my thoughts. This video will cover the good bits, the bad bits, the neutral bits, and whether or not I think this lens is worthwhile. Finally, everything that you see in this video, including this talking head, is filmed or photographed by the 18mm f1.4, which is why I'm not holding it in my hands. The only exceptions are obviously clips of the lens itself and clips of me using the lens, because as it stands today in 2022, lenses still can't film themselves, unfortunately. 18mm on a crop sensor Fuji is around 27mm on a full frame sensor, and in the world of street and documentary photography, this is one of the staple lenses that everyone goes to. I've covered the different focal lengths in detail in the previous video. However, to keep it short for this video, all I'm going to say is that this lens I use for my establishing shots. So anytime I want to show the viewer the entire location. This lens is also fantastic for architecture, for landscape, and for environmental portraits. Personally, I find this lens is amazing for just documenting my day out. So on those days where I don't really want to do any photography, but if I see something interesting, I'll take a picture, this is the lens that I would bring. Now, I do have a small confession to make, and that is I actually prefer the 23mm focal length, which is around 35mm on a full frame sensor. However, the reason I didn't go for the 23mm f1.4 and I went for the 18 is because the 18 just gives me some cropping room. So I would still frame and shoot as if I had a 23mm lens, but I just have a small percentage of safety room for if I want to straighten the image, or if I need to change the perspective or change the geometry, or if I just have to recompose the photo in post entirely. Now let's kick off the good bits with the party piece of this lens, which is the sharpness. Sure, at f1.4, the corners will be a little bit softer than the center, but by any stretch of imagination, overall, this lens is very sharp. Now, I'm a proud anti-pixel peeper, but using this now and again, I just can't help but punch into like 200-300% and then get somewhat satisfied. That actually sounds really wrong. Now let's talk about the autofocus, which was the next biggest upgrade of this lens, and honestly, it's a huge improvement on the previous generation prime lenses, even the f2 primes. This uses the same linear motors as the red badge zoom lenses. However, in my opinion, I would say these are more accurate and better focusing than the zoom lenses, to the point where I can leave this lens at f1.4, leave face tracking on, and for 95% of the time, it will track me and keep me in focus very well without hunting around too much. For photography, the autofocus has been pretty much faultless. Now, there are a couple of elements about the way this lens focuses, which I'm still not sure whether it's me, the lens, or the camera, but I'll talk about them in the negatives bit in a bit. And the final positive about this lens is the overall build quality and the overall feel of this lens. It feels like a very high quality item that's been built very well, and it feels like it's going to last you a long time, and that it's a premium product. So overall, I have no issues with the build. Now, in terms of reliability and how this lens wears over time, I can't really say right now. I need another year's worth of use at least. However, I'll probably do a follow-up video in a year or two talking just about that. At this point, I want to say a huge thank you to today's video sponsor, which is Squarespace. Now, I've already mentioned many times why I think it's important to have your own online portfolio and your own corner of the internet. Why not create sections of your website for specific trips or for specific events? So if you and a group of friends or your family go on holiday to, say you come here to Istanbul, you take a bunch of photos. Rather than just sending photos to 50 different people, you can upload them in a very nice professional way to your website, and then just send one link to everyone you know, and then they can go view the photos at any time and even download them for themselves if they wish. If you use the link below, you can grab yourself a free trial and then a further 10% off your first purchase when you decide to sign up. Thank you again to Squarespace for supporting, and thank you again to you for watching this bit of the video. Like any product, nothing's perfect, and even this lens, with all its good bits, there are some downsides and a few things that I think are worth mentioning. The first negative, in my opinion, is the aperture ring. So on a 33mm lens, which by the looks of it are the same design, same size, same everything, the aperture ring has a very good solid click to it. It's not too tight, but it doesn't get knocked about easily. Whereas on the 18, I feel the aperture ring is like almost too loose. Now, I'm not sure if this is my specific lens, or maybe the 33 also should be that loose and maybe I've knocked it, or maybe there's something wrong with that lens. But to me, it just seems that the aperture ring on the 18 is way too loose, and if there was some kind of a locking mechanism to keep it locked at f2 or f4, that's okay, but because there isn't, it just seems like it can get knocked very easily, and if you're not paying attention, it can definitely mess up a shot. Now, moving on to the autofocus, there are a couple of things, as I've said, I want to mention. So I just want to make it clear that I'm still trying to figure out whether it's me or whether it's the camera or the lens, but I found that if I am in a high aperture, so for example, anything above f11, but more so around f14, f16, aperture range, the autofocus is just not as snappy. It's still good, don't get me wrong, it still, acquires focus fairly quickly, but there is a noticeable difference between focusing at f14, f15 versus focusing at f4 or even f1.4. So maybe it's me, maybe I've done something wrong, but it's very repeatable, and it's something that I wouldn't say it's game changing, I wouldn't say it bothers me at all, it's just something that I've noticed and I thought is worth mentioning. Now, there is one more negative which I think is a bit superficial, because it's not so much the issue with the lens, it's more so the issue of how it's perceived by people who might not understand how this lens works, and that is when the lens is switched off, one of the elements is quite loose inside and it can move around. It's the same with all of the other linear motor lenses. There is an element inside, so if you shake the lens when the lens is off, you can hear it moving around. In the 18, it's particularly more noticeable compared to the 33 or the other zoom lenses, and I've had a couple of people message me say they've bought the 18, they think the lens is broken because when the camera is switched off, that focusing element is moving around and they can hear it moving around. However, when the camera is switched on, then they can't hear it, which is, to be expected, because then the lens motor or the focusing motor is engaged, therefore it's not moving around. The following points, in my opinion, are neither good nor bad, because I think they're just very subjective, and they are the cost, weight, and size of this lens. Because to some people, this lens might be too big and too expensive, whereas to other people, they'll think it's actually quite small and quite cheap for what it is. I am somewhere in the middle, because even though I can justify the price tag, and it is quite expensive, and I can justify the extra weight and size, it's definitely on the limit of what I could justify. However, the way I look at it is that these new f1.4 lenses, from what Fuji have said, are also designed to fully accommodate future cameras which will have a higher megapixel count, which means if you buy one of these lenses today, then effectively you'll be future-proofed for a very long time. And if we look at the previous generation lenses, like the 35 f1.4, the 23 f1.4, like the older ones, that these are all replacing, those lenses have been around for years. So if this lasts me for, let's say, 4 or 5 years before a new version comes out, then is that worth the money? I would say yes, considering it's something that I'll use almost on a daily basis. So I hope you found this video useful. I hope it's answered a few questions. I've tried to keep it as non-technical as possible, because there are plenty of those videos out there already, and I tried to keep it very high level so you get an overall perspective of this lens. And finally, before I go, I just want to leave you with a small montage of footage from Istanbul, both photo and video, using this lens over the last few days, just to give you a sense of the types of images that this lens can achieve. So again, thank you ever so much for your time today. Hope you're safe, hope you're doing good, and I'll catch you in the next video. Okay, in a bit, bye. do that and go. And there's another one.